Wonderful. Well, thanks everybody for coming today. We've had quite a journey to get here. This has been a passion project for RDI and for ourselves, and certainly for the researchers for quite some time. My name's Margot Cathcart. I'm the president and CEO of Rural Manitoba Economic Development, and I am so thrilled to be here today to introduce the researchers and our partners and everybody that worked on the project. As I think all of you know, rural data is very, very hard to come by, and there's lots of gaps, and we see ourselves as being a hub that's going to try and help resolve some of those issues. From the outset, we were really clear about what we wanted this project to be and what it should not be, and this work confirms a lot of what we already knew, but it also raises a lot of questions, and that's important because, in my opinion, any good research project is going to raise more questions. It's not going to answer them all. If all it does is answer questions and you haven't dug deep enough and you haven't done the project justice, all you've done is reaffirm what you already knew. So this project has achieved that. And there's lots of things that those questions are going to do to help guide next steps, because this is just phase one of what we see becoming an ongoing project and ongoing work. The Pulse of Rural is intended to be practical and accessible. It's designed to support more informed decision-making, stronger conversations all across rural Manitoba. It's not to sit on the shelf. It's meant to be used, revisited, and questioned as communities, organizations, and policymakers respond to changing realities. So as all of you read it and participate in it, I don't promise I'm going to be able to answer all of your questions, and neither do the researchers, but we want to hear them so that we're able to continue to modify and evolve this important work. The work has also strengthened our collaboration with the Rural Development Institute at Brandon University, and I'm going to let Wayne introduce his team in a few minutes, because RMED and RDI bring different perspectives, and that's part of the value of this. We're aligned in our focus around accessibility, learning, and real-world appreciation, while maintaining independence on how we approach the work. It holds true our values by building workforce skills and talent in today's youth, which in turn enriches and builds capacity across the regions and the province. The report marks the beginning of an ongoing body of work, as I mentioned. This report represents the first phase and is an initial effort to capture insights that have not been brought together in this way in Canada. In the months ahead, the findings will be further reviewed, refined, validated, future phases planned, and indicators and overall approaches developed. Thank you to everyone who contributed to the project, and thank you for being part of today's launch. We know this report will support the good work already happening in rural Manitoba, and we look forward to the questions this report will raise into those questions and where those questions lead. And I would be very remiss if I did not, from RMED's perspective, introduce Michael Asante, who will be speaking later. Michael and Wayne are the brain trust behind this concept, and it's their vision and foresight and extremely hard efforts that have brought it to reality. So on behalf of us, thank you very much, Michael, for all the work that you've done on this.
Thank you so much, Margot, for the kind words. I would also like to introduce the authors of this report. John is here, John, Charlene, Dr. Gary, and Wayne. They were very instrumental in putting together this report. I remember when the motivation came, it started from, how do we get data at the local level, and how do you make sure that rural municipalities are able to use this data, compare with other municipalities, and being able to understand it? And so that's where the motivation came from. And so tonight, this afternoon, we are very excited to launch this report. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that we talk today, as we talk about community well-being, I respectfully acknowledge that I live and work on Credit 1 and 2 lands, the traditional homelands of the Dakota, Anishinaabe Crew, Oji Crew, Dene, and the Métis people. It is important to note that Indigenous peoples in Canada, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis take a holistic view of community, and there the concept of capacity, roles, and overall well-being is central to both community and development for Indigenous cultures. So yeah, I want to introduce the Pulse of Rural Manitoba as a municipal project developed in conjunction with RDI and RMED, and the core purpose of this project was to create some data which is accessible, localized, reliable, and that can support better decision-making and more effective planning across rural Manitoba. We were very fortunate to receive funding from MyTax, and so through MyTax, we were able to fund John and Shelleen and the graduate students who were able to work hand in hand with RMED and RDI on this project. So we want to say a big thank you to MyTax for this opportunity. What really motivated this project is the recognition that while we already have valuable data tools such as the StatCan and RMED dashboards, there is also still very severe, several important gaps in how that information can actually be used at the local level. One challenge is that there's not always easy access to this data, and indicators that goes beyond non-economic or non-demographic are not easily accessible. One another challenge that we also find out was that municipalities often do not have simple tools to compare their data or understand it in context. And perhaps most importantly, many small rural municipalities in our region do not have that internal capacity, staff time, or just the analytical resources to do this kind of work. So we are very excited that we're able to start a project like this. This is the first time at this level that we are doing this in Canada. And so personally, I'm very excited about it. This project is not just compiling data, but we are turning it into more, a tool that is more usable. We also want to help our communities identify, their current conditions. The context of the data also is very, very important. Understand the opportunities in their communities, set priorities, and also support implementation and evaluation over time. Okay. In this phase of the projects, the focus of this project was on 125 rural municipalities in the southern Manitoba, and the goal was to build more consistent and locally meaningful evidence-based that municipalities could use for planning and decision-making. And in terms of method, as I said, the team began examining about 10 broad themes, reflecting pressure, structural changes, policy demands in rural municipalities. From that process, 9 themes and 37 indicators were developed for the report. And what the methodology was that they scan Statistics Canada data, look at our data sources here in RMED, and also scan municipal websites. They also went ahead to assemble this data or indicators, do more qualitative analysis within the regions and municipalities, brought together themes and identified trends, patterns, and emerging narratives and gaps in the data. I think it's also important that there are some limitations that we want to talk about. One of the biggest challenges was that data was often scattered. And so once you are scanning municipal data through their website, you see that data is scattered all over the place. And being able to bring all this from multiple sources into one platform was a bit of a challenge. On top of that, the format and the level of detail and accessibility also varied across different municipalities. That's also influenced the analysis. I will invite Wayne to talk more about the methodology and then the next steps and what the project was about.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So my name is Wayne Kelly. I'm the director of the Rural Development Institute and the team at RDI, and had the great fortune of working with Michael and the rest of RMED to sort of work on this project. It was about a year ago, maybe even like 13 months ago, Michael, that we sort of sat down and first talked about this idea. And, you know, it's something that whenever we would see each other in the past, we would talk about that we need more of that local data. And so it's really fantastic that we are now here launching, you know, the first version of the Pulse report for rural Manitoba. Excited where we've gotten it to in a year. It's been an amazing amount of work. Sherlyn and John and Gary and Michael, thank you so much. And I'm really excited about where we think it's going to be going. And it is a work in process, and it's an evolving tool. It's rather substantive already. And so one of the pieces is going to be going forward is how do we make sure that's accessible, and how do we use it? So one of the things I just want to talk about today is just give a little bit of a background about how we came up with some of the indicators and some of the decisions that we came through. So Michael mentioned that there was 10 indicators or 10 themes that we started with. What we really wanted when we got going was we really wanted to make sure that we had a data set that wasn't just demographics, wasn't just economics, wasn't just one element. And so we said we need sort of a comprehensive community set of indicators, sort of referenced it around a well-being approach. And we wanted to see what indicators we could identify that were universally available across all 125 rural municipalities and were easily accessible. So we actually sat in the rural development classroom and we started mapping this out. And we quickly realized that not all the indicator sets that we were thinking about, all the themes that we were thinking about were both universally available or easily accessible. So for one of those ones, and everyone in the room that knows me, you know that I have a bit of a passion for digital rural and rural technology. And so I'm going to pick on connectivity as one of the topics that didn't make it. The data is there. It is available on the National Broadband Connectivity Map. But one of the challenges is it's down at a street view. So every mile segment of road in Manitoba, you can identify what the connectivity level is there and who the providers are. But there's no easy way to aggregate that up, to combine that up to a municipal view. So if you're making decisions as a municipal council or somebody working with municipalities, there's no simple way to understand what's the connectivity for that municipality as a whole. And so we made the decision. We didn't have the resources, the time, or the mandate in this round to go through and actually create a new indicator or a new approach. But we put that one in the parking lot because that's one we want to tackle going forward. But that's an example of while the data was available, it wasn't accessible. So those are some of the conversations that we'd have around the data sets going forward. So what we ended up with, and we wanted 3 to 5 sort of indicators to start with for each of these themes, knowing that, you know, it was going to be a big chunk of work to put it together. I don't think Sherlyn and John sort of knew at the time or believed us at the time in terms of how much work it was going to be, but they do now, right? It was a great piece of work. We ended up with these 7. So demographics, housing, economy, migration, transportation, capacity, and climate change. What didn't make the list, I already talked about connectivity, well-being. So that was the one that it was not universally where the indicators were not universally available. So typically a lot of well-being indicators come from on-the-ground interviews or surveys, and those aren't done consistently across the province. So we're going to need to figure out what can be used instead of those surveys, or how do we do that in a really sort of efficient way across the province in the future. But so that one didn't make it because of universality. Connectivity didn't make it because of accessibility. Tourism, we're on the fence. And full disclosure, it was in one version. We had a couple of indicators that did make it into one version of the final report, but we didn't have enough data to get it all the way there. And so in version 2, I think that's definitely something that's going to be a priority. Doug Ramsey at the back here, he's a tourism researcher, so I know I'm going to be knocking on his door lots as the next year comes up. How can we make this work? We know there's data at Tourism Manitoba. How do we incorporate that? How do we align that with some of the Stats Canada data, and what makes sense from a universal and an accessible format for a sort of a key set of like 5 tourism indicators? So so that's somehow we made some of the decision around the themes. And so what we found is that even just with these 7 themes, it gives us a comprehensive view of the communities that is not easily or is not sort of readily available elsewhere. And so we were able to put it into the report. And how many pages did we end up with the report? Because I know, again, I'd seen it before. We put in and took out the tourism data. So we must be at around 120, 130, 142 pages, right? And so the format of the report is really sort of designed, each of these themes and each of these indicator sets has sort of an introductory page, gives you sort of the highlights and does a comparative overview with the province, city of Winnipeg, and Canada when that data is available. And then we dive into the deep data for each of the individual indicators. And so in some of those sections, that means you have pretty robust data tables. In others, it's smaller. But we wanted to make sure that every rural municipality in Manitoba could find their data for every one of those indicators. And so you're able to go through, if you're from Riverdale, or if you're from Hamiota, I'm being a little sort of Westman biased over here, if you're from the city of Steinbach, you'd be able to go through and find your name on the list. You'd find in the region that you're with, you'd get to see some of the aggregate sort of values for the regions as a whole, and you'd be able to see where you compare on any one of those 37 indicators across the province, and then even at a provincial and national level as well. So that's the intent of the Pulse, where we've gotten it to so far, right? Is to be able to provide this resource for community members, for policymakers, both at the local level, provincial level, federal level, and for researchers to use this data and to be able to access it. What we know is that this is just the beginning, right? Lots of great conversations between RDI and RMED, lots of enthusiasm for the research team that was working on this. How do we take this forward now? This is a fantastic first kick at it. We know it's not done. Like Margot said, we know that in many cases, we've raised more questions than we've answered. We know that there's going to be things that people find in the report and they say either this is not right, or why did you include this? One of the examples in the method section, we mentioned that we used a municipal website scan to sort of identify some of the results, right? Some of the data. That worked really well in some cases, and it didn't work at all in others. And I'll give you a good example. This one stayed in, but we talk about municipal staff that are dedicated to economic development and community development. What we found, and I hadn't realized this before and hadn't thought through it in this way before, but your medium to small size communities would include their staff on their websites. And it was great. We could count them. We could identify which ones are focusing on economic development, which may be on recreation. But as your municipalities got bigger and as they got more active, what we found is that they often had a separate agency or entity that was doing economic development. So Portage, for example, has the Portage and Region Economic Development. And so the count, when we just used the municipal website, it did not include those other agencies. So one of the next steps that we're going to need to do to make sure our data is accurate and sort of reflects the reality on the ground is take that municipal scan and expand it to other entities that are on the ground. We didn't have the capacity to do that this time. We've identified it and parked it, and that's going to be one of those sort of key evolutions as we go forward for the indicators. I do want to come back to the connectivity one as well, and I think we can tackle that one, at least for general information and decision making. I think we can figure out a way to move forward on that. The tourism indicator set, as we mentioned, and so there's another faculty member here. Recreation is a key part of that, Ian. So that's something that has come up in conversations with policymakers, right? What's the state of local arenas, right? What's the state of local parks? Those sorts of questions come up, and how do we include that? Not just the presence thereof, but the quality and sort of the current realities. The other thing we want to do is how do we best share this with rural communities? One of the challenges and one of the things that we identified, and Margot mentioned it, and it was on the slides, capacity to use the data. We've shared this preliminary findings with some high-level stakeholders and actors in rural development. and economic development. And we heard the same thing that we're hearing back from community members and that we've heard back from our team is the data is only as good as if people are using it, right? If it sits on a shelf, as we heard, it doesn't add value. So what we want to make sure is how do we get the data in front of the local decision makers and in front of policymakers? So there's some tools already out there. RMED's dashboard is fantastic, lets you do deep dives into individual communities. What we know is that there's some communities that might not have the resources or the capacity to use sort of some of the more robust data sets, right? So how do we make sure that is it for fact sheets, is it other things that we can create and provide to those community members to make sure that the data is available and that they're able to sort of navigate it and apply it. So that's going to be one of our key next steps, right, is sort of understanding what's the best format and what's the best supports to make sure that this data is being used at the local level. We haven't even started doing the analysis on the results yet, right? This is really sharing the data that's there. Now we want to be able to start looking at how do we actually analyze, what does this mean for connectivity, right? Once we can get that data set sorted. Right now we have sort of 7 indicators around well-being. We don't have them all, but what does that already tell us about community well-being for all 125 rural municipalities? So we want to make sure that we start building the analysis into the steps going forward. And one of the ones that we're really excited about, and it's funny when I stand up at a community meeting or at even some government conversations, and I let them know how excited we are about Census 2026, right? And then the data release. I'm always surprised that not everybody shares my enthusiasm, right? But the team, the 5 of us and RMED and RDI are very excited about the upcoming census and the release of data. We know that it will slowly get released over, it gets collected this spring, very soon, in 2026. And it's going to be released slowly over 2027 and sort of waves of data coming out. And some of them will align with some of the themes that we have, demographics, housing, immigration, and some won't. But one of the things that we're committed to is making sure that by the start of the release in sort of February, March of 2027, we have Pulse 2.0 that has addressed some of those challenges and evolved some of those indicators. And that we're able to incorporate the census data into the Pulse as it gets released over the year. So not real time, but like near real time updates to Pulse 2.0. And again, we're really excited because that gives both researchers, obviously, but also local decision makers and policymakers, up to the date data about their communities to make decisions with. So that's one of the things as well as we're looking forward over the next sort of 12 to 18 months that we're really keen on. So the report is available on both the RMED and the RDI websites. And we'll be making sure that we're sharing those links. I know that it's actually going to be getting circulated at AMM this week with a workshop and event. And we'll be making sure that we're putting it out through RDI's newsletter and RDI's social media pages. So the links are up on both of the websites. If you want a printed version, you'll probably need to talk to Margot really nicely because it is 142 pages. But the digital format is really, really clean and easy to use as well. So thank you again for coming. Thanks again to RMED for, this has been a great partnership. It's been a whirlwind year on this, and I look forward to where we're going next. So perfect. Thanks so much.